Good morning, everyone. My name's Elliot Fonte. I'm an account executive with Arctic Wolf and the Territory Lead for the Southwest. And day to day, it's my responsibility to consult prospective clients' security requirements to try and work out whether or not Arctic Wolf can be of service to them. Been with Arctic Wolf for 7 months. Prior to that, I worked with Rubrik, helping them build out their public sector business in the lead up to their recent IPO. I was with Nutanix in the infrastructure side of things before that for 5 years, serving enterprise customers in the Southwest. And I've lived and worked in the Southwest for my entire life. I'm passionate about raising awareness of cybersecurity wherever possible. You'll be pleased to know by design, this is not an Arctic Wolf pitch today. It's more of a learnings from the field type talk and things that we're seeing through conversations that we're having with prospective clients on a daily basis. And specifically, we're going to take a look at how organizations in the Southwest can start to take steps to combat cybercrime with limited resources, which we've observed to be quite a large challenge with the organizations that we're speaking to. So Will touched on this a little bit. One of the examples I've got here is Gloucester City Council. We've probably all read about Tewkesbury Council. I read yesterday they were still down 3 days later. But it seems to me that cybercrime, not just in the Southwest, but across the UK, is not slowing down. These are some news articles that have come out over the course of the last few years, and some of which you'll be very familiar with. In fact, what stood out to me, certainly in the last 2 years, is how it feels like the whole of the UK is aware about cybercrime. My parents, for example, are aware of the Royal Mail situation, and they approach me, and they've never had a great grip on what I do in my line of work, but they approach me about what went on with Royal Mail because it's been on our TV screens. But the title of this slide is something that I really want to talk to, and that is that we are not winning the war on cybercrime. And I took this title, full disclosure, from a LinkedIn post that came from David Fraser. And I don't know if any of you know that name, but he's just left, the Deputy CISO of the Bank of England. And I thought that was quite interesting that the Deputy CISO of the Bank of England, with a seemingly bottomless pit of resources and money for an organization that underpins our complete financial stability in this country, tells us that we are not winning the war on cybercrime. That's we, me, you, organizations across the UK, organizations in the Southwest. And we can see that through examples of attacks that are causing massive issues with organizations. We spoke about specifically councils. I'm not sure if you're aware, but if you go back to like Redcar and Cleveland and Hackney, Hackney was over £10 million in taxpayers' money. Redcar and Cleveland was 12 and a half. Gloucester was about 3. We don't know about Tewkesbury yet. But these are all very well profiled attacks. The ones that really stand out to me are when you actually lift the lid and you find out about organizations, and I'm not sure if any of you are aware of this, like KNP Logistics in the bottom left-hand corner here. So they were a once thriving logistics organization based in Kettering that got hit with a ransomware attack, and that was the catalyst to them going out of business and making 730 people redundant. In David's post, he speaks about the fact that we need a shake-up collectively, like we need to look at ways to pool data to calculate responses and defend as one. And actually in Will's talk there, that was really standing out to me, like speaking about the different strands of ransomware that we can keep our eyes, like where do you start with that? It's an incredible tool that Will's building and a huge resource. But one of the things that we're struggling with, I think, on a day-to-day basis is being able to allocate the time to provide robust defenses for the organizations that we represent. So it's really important that we start to pay attention to this. And one of the natural, and I don't want to say knee-jerk reactions to cybercrime, but one of the natural steps that we would take, I think, to any problem that we have in life is to spend money to solve the issue. Specifically for cybersecurity, very often it's buy a tool to solve the problem. And in fact, you might be aware that there are close to 3,500 cybersecurity vendors all out there, where everyone's got their own approach to solving this very important problem. And if you've ever been to InfoSec before, I don't know if any of you are aware of that event at the Excel, there's never a greater example of all those cybersecurity vendors in one place. It's like an offense on the senses. You go in there, there's hundreds of different vendors, and we're guilty of it as well, by the way. Everyone's got great big stands and nice shiny signs, and some of them got arcade machines, and they're all trying to solve this very important problem. But one of the challenges that we've got is that what's true today as it pertains to cybercrime, and again, Will demonstrated this in his talk, is going to be very different tomorrow. So we really need to think tactically, but also strategically over the long term. How do we solve this problem? Over the course of time, the way we've aimed to solve that problem is to spend more money. And last year in 2023, globally, we spent £150 billion on cybersecurity tools. That was an 11% year-on-year increase. But unfortunately, this is what we refer to as the effectiveness gap. If we cannot effectively operationalize those tools, we are compounding the problem. And the cybercrime losses, which last year were just shy of £10 trillion globally, are far outpacing the amount of money that we're spending on these cybersecurity tools. Losses are increasing about 21% year on year. We're only spending 11% year on year more on these technologies. So we call this an effectiveness gap. And it's all about, and I'll talk to the Southwest in a second, how we as individuals supporting the organizations that we work for can operationalize the telemetry and the logs and the information that we're getting out from these tools. And we can't really do that effectively, especially when we've got restricted teams. And this is not least experienced in the Southwest. As I mentioned, it's a territory that I've worked and lived in for my entire life. I support that today. So I look after Southampton up to Reading, along the M4 and everything in the bottom left-hand country. So it's the Southwest and some. But as Jeff highlighted, there's a great piece of work that comes out every year from DCIT, and there's some really interesting labour stats in there. There's some interesting stats around organisations and their how they've been impacted by cybercrime. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there was a shortfall last year of 11,000 cyber professionals across the UK. And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about for a moment. One of the observations I've made in my personal life is I think we're doing much better now than what we were 2 or 3 years ago. And I see that in my 2 daughters. I've got 2 teenage daughters who go to secondary school, and every year they get to go to Cheltenham to an event called Cyber First. In fact, one of them bought me back a pop socket to put on my phone. And they go to that, and I think that's developing the next kind of iteration, the next generation of cybersecurity professionals. But that's like 5, 6, 7 years down the line. At the moment, we don't have enough people in the UK. And the DCIT also provided information suggesting the fact that across the UK, 50% of organisations have nobody in cyber. I would suggest, based on my experiences of doing, 4 to 5 net new client meetings a week, it's probably higher for us in the Southwest, especially in the mid-sized organisations in which we work with. Very often we have IT generalists who are responsible for infrastructure, networking, and cybersecurity. And one of the interesting things, and this is a combination, I guess, of what we've learned about the labour market and what we're seeing in the field. I won't name the individual because I've not clarified that I can call him out on this, but I met with an IT leader about 2 or 3 years ago down in Plymouth, and he's responsible for the organisation. He's the head of infrastructure. And I sat down with him, and I, as you normally do in this type of role, just said, what are your key challenges at the moment? What are the things that we can look at where we can help? He took a sip of his coffee, he drew a breath, and through gritted teeth, he said, attrition. And I said, okay, right, well, tell me more. Help me understand that. And he said, gone are the days now after COVID, and that's all I mention about COVID because I know it gets overused, but gone are the days where individuals, professionals might be working in London or Manchester or a more densely populated area, and they want to take a lifestyle change and come and enjoy the benefits of living by the coast in Plymouth or in Devon or wherever it might be. So they move their family down, they maybe take a slight pay cut, and I get them to come and work in my organization. And conversely, we keep hold of people in the region because they want to stay here. The problem we've now got is with the kind of whole adoption of remote working and London organizations with a 33% median pay increase, and I'm not encouraging all of you to go and start working for London organizations, please don't, stay where you are. But we've got this challenge where people can enjoy the benefits of living by the coast, but get a higher paid job of working for a remote organization in London. And we've got this backdrop of the fact that 50% of businesses within this report from DCIT, so it's 1 in 2, reported some form of a breach in 2023. So Just to summarize what we've highlighted, which I think is the problem we're going to try and discuss today, is we have a huge resource constraint globally of cybersecurity professionals, but I think that's especially experienced in the Southwest. We have organizations never spending more on cybersecurity tools, but we have an inability to operationalize the data that's coming out from these tools. I spoke to a chap the other day, and he's got 3 or 4 different detection tools within his environment, and he is one person. And his big concern is, and he used this term, this is not my language, I'm worried about plausible deniability, because if there's a situation where we're breached and the breadcrumbs were there in this network detection tool and I didn't see it because I haven't got the time to look at these things 9 by 5, let alone 24 by 7, because I've got a life to lead, how am I going to go and explain that to the board? So these are the types of challenges that we're discussing with prospective clients and we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. So 3 steps that we recommend to think about broadly, and this doesn't just align to Arctic Wolf, this aligns broadly when you're looking at combating cybercrime with limited resources. And I'm going to assume that if you're an organization or you represent an organization in the Southwest, you are facing that challenge at this current time. So the first thing to do is to quantify the risk. The second thing is to calculate the cost and the impact a breach would have on you and your organization. And then finally, we'd encourage you to think about mitigating that through an external service. So let's look at that in a bit more detail. So step 1, quantify the risk. Now, these are, just to say, they're a bit of an eye chart. I'm not going to go through each number on this. These are examples I've anonymized from clients in the past, but it's more of a visual aid. I don't want to use the term alarmed because it sounds a little bit accusational, but what I would say is what I've been surprised by is the amount of individuals that are responsible for cybersecurity. Some are generalists, some are specific, that have no idea of the risk from a financial impact standpoint that's posed to them and their organization if they were breached. And going back to Will's point, it's very likely that's going to happen at some point, and that's supported by the stats of DSIP. Now, there's a huge variable here, because some organizations, the biggest financial impact of them being breached is a fine because they're breaching regulatory compliance. Some organizations are in manufacturing, and the biggest impact for them is loss of production. There's a variance of this, but what I would say to you is there are calculators online through cyber insurers, for example, Hiscox. This is one that we produce at Arctic Wolf, but Hiscox have one, and you can have a rough grasp as to what the problem is that's posed to your organization. I think you really need to quantify that and understand it, because based on my experience of having these conversations on a regular basis, the biggest challenge that IT leaders have is articulating the risk to the board. The board generally speaks in numbers, and I think I'm reassured by seeing the fact that now board members are seeing stories like the Royal Mail and Allen & Overy and Tewkesbury, and they're driving improvements through cybersecurity professionals in their team. But more often than not, the direction of travel is, I need to tell them about why they should be spending more money looking at a service to help us protect our environment. So it can be as efficient as you like, and you can go online and use a tool. You can use a spreadsheet. I'll give you some questions at the end of this talk, but it's important to look at, like, what's the impact of ransomware? If we had a breach, what would that cost us? What would business email compromise cost us? And we've got things like percentages about how likely that would be for you and your organization, and just get a rough grasp as to what the exposure is to you and your organization. The next step that we'd encourage you to think about taking, and my slide's not come up on this, but I'll just talk through it anyway, is to calculate the cost of actually doing it yourself. I think we highlighted here that we've got this backdrop of organizations whereby it's very difficult to operationalize cybersecurity tools. We've estimated for a mid-sized organization, you need a minimum of 4 to 6 people to staff a security operations center on a 24/7 basis. And let's face it, it's very difficult to get one person in for cybersecurity, let alone 4 to 6. But again, sometimes when you have these conversations with the board, the question comes, well, why are you not doing it? Well, very often when there's online calculators for this, if you start to look at the costs for running a tool and running your own SIEM, things like ingestion charges and log retention, those go through the roof very quickly. So it really points the finger to think about mitigating through service externally. And these are the types of stats that we present back through to senior leaders, both at board level, or we enable cybersecurity professionals to articulate themselves. Just to go through this process of saying, okay, if we were breached, we think it would cost us that amount. And this is what it would cost us to run it ourselves or set it up and run it ourselves. And then we can get a rough grasp on ROI. As I've mentioned, there are tools available to do this. We have a tool that we run for our clients. You can do it yourself online, as I highlighted, Hiscox have one, or various other cyber insurers. But even if you want to do it on the back of a postcard, I'll share these slides with Jeff after, or feel free to screen grab them. These are the types of questions you want to think about. And I'd really encourage you just to sit down and, over the course of an hour, just get a rough grasp as to what these numbers are, because it helps inform the urgency of making changes and improvements to your environment. So finally, once you've got a grip on that, like, what is my risk exposure? And what would it cost to run myself? And 9 times out of 10, when you look at trying to run it yourself, it's prohibitive, both from a cost and resource standpoint. So once you've assessed the risk that posed to you and your organization, what we would encourage you to do is think about outsourcing that to an external company. Now, there's a broad range. By the way, the answer is not Arctic Wolf. What's the question? Like, we do have a play in this, and we do provide services for mid to large enterprise. But, if you're a 50 user organization and you want to take some positive steps, there are better suited companies out there. And I think what's really important is, when you're looking back at the numbers, if you're looking at risk exposure and you're looking at a spend here, there needs to be an equitable balance. By that, I mean, if the spend is more than the risk exposure, you might want to think about different ways of doing it, right? So this is not the answer for everybody. And I'll give you an example of this. I met with and again, I won't give specifics, I've not qualified it with them, but I met with a food producer, not a manufacturer, but they produce foods in the Southwest, really interesting organization, quite advanced actually. And I sat down with him and I said, okay, well, they support the big four retailers in the UK. I say, do you have any contracts that require you to have certain certifications or regulatory compliance and alignment, Cyber Essentials Plus, ISO 27001, and do you have to adhere to that to trade with these companies? The answer is no. Okay, right. Oh, if you got breached next week and you couldn't operate for a week, what would that mean for you? Well, the answer to that, in summary, is we're still largely manual for a number of different services. We had an outage due to a data center issue a year ago, and we managed just fine for a week. It was uncomfortable. Well, okay, well, for you, the answer is not a service like Arctic Wolf or outsourcing it. It might be improving tools and making things robust. So you always have to have this right equitable balance. But let's say the risk that's posed to you in your organization is way, way more than the spend. I'd really think about trying to articulate to the board of outsourcing that risk. There was a report that was generated by Forrester a year and a half ago that suggests you can mitigate around 90% of the risk that's posed to you in your organization through using an external managed detection and response service. That term is commonly used now. 5 years ago, it might have been managed SIEM. You might hear security operations as a service, but in essence, you're outsourcing that to an organization that gives you 24/7 eyes on glass and remediation of issues. And really important, you want to look for organizations that will commit to improving your security posture over time. It should not just be a transactional, tactical relationship whereby there's a problem, they solve it. You want to make sure you're working with organizations that help you improve, that leave you better than they found you. So think about that and how you can leverage purpose-built technology, things like open XDR platforms, with real quality talent. And going right back to what David Fraser said, this idea about organizations pooling together data and defending as one, you start to see examples of that now in the MDR market, whereby you've got large organizations who have thousands of customers and they enjoy the benefits of all the knowledge that they've got from those customers, and they've got their finger on the pulse as it pertains to threat analysis and investigations, but they can deliver that through a local MSP type white glove service. So if that type of service is going to take, let's take a nominal number of 90% of the risk that's posed to you in your organization, What about the remaining 10%? But then I'd really encourage you to think about protective commercial wrappers. So if you've not started looking at cyber insurance, now's the time to do it. I spoke to a cybersecurity consultant the other day who told me when I first filled one of these out for my clients, it was a 4-page document. Now it's close to 40. It's getting harder and harder to get. But also think about having conversations with organizations who can put protective wrappers like warranties around the protection, i.e., they will stand behind what they're committing to do from an SLA standpoint for you and your organization. So hopefully that's a bit of an insight into types of conversations that we're having on a daily basis. Never has there been more desire and need to investigate, I guess, managed detection and response or security operations service, because I think, especially in the Southwest for us, the organizations that we support and that operate within our territory, they're faced with the same risk and challenges as the rest of the globe are. But I think we're really struggling at the moment, from what I've seen, with finding the right resources. We have really quality people, but we do not have enough of them. And that's one of the challenges that we discuss with them on a daily basis. I'd love to hear from you if you're interested in anything that I've just said, or you want to look at the business value assessment that we highlighted. You can just drop me a note. And then also, you know, if you're seeing different, we'd love to hear that as well, because as I've highlighted right from the get-go, my goal is to kind of learn from what I'm seeing in cybersecurity discussions in the Southwest and engage with other professionals in this area. So I hope that's been of interest to you, and I'll welcome any questions.